familiar with our case study this week? I think it'll be you. So, we read about this married couple that were having some issues, and so we were kind of getting only like one side of the story, right, from Lars' point of view. So, what, in your opinion, might be missing in his story? And what might be keeping him from discovering what he is missing? Any thoughts?
I think it's more easier said than done. I know that, but I think he's kind of at a point where they just need to have like a comp inventory. They need to be like, all right, like what's going on? Why don't we understand each other? Like I'm trying my best, and apparently it's not good enough, and this just ain't working. Like it should work, but it's not, and they just need to like hash it out. They got to sit down, lock themselves in a room, and figure it out.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's easier said than done, because I think when you have the spirit of contention, it's kind of hard to be in the same room with that person that you're, have all those feelings towards. So yeah, in order for that to work, I think you should be open, to the conversation first. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Moving on to the next question. Okay, so the second part of the first question actually says, what might be keeping him from discovering what he's missing? What do you think gets on the way?
I think like the one thing is he thinks he's in the right. Like he's the one thing that makes him mad is that the wife is all like, "You don't help in the management of the house," and he's like, "Oh, but I do all these chores." And the only thing I'm thinking of is that chores is not equal to management. Her opinion of management may be totally different from the chores. So he needs to figure out what she means.
Yeah, you might think that you understand what another person means, but they're like can be talking about like entirely different thing, right? Yeah, so probably he needs to be an active listener. Yeah. Okay.
Mm,
Yeah, Vanessa?
Sorry. Maybe he's like in the box says like in a part of war. Maybe he's like in the I deserve box. I deserve to be treated this way. Why is he doing this? But also he has to understand her point of view. He needs to understand why she thinks that way, and that is when he needs to apply like habit 5, I think, of the Kobe's book. Like first listen and then seek to be understood. That would work maybe.
Definitely, definitely. I agree with you. For him being in his box, that definitely gets on the way of understanding. Okay, so it seems pretty harsh for Han to stop loving such a great guy, as is often the case in contentious situations. Both of these stories, Stop Loving and Great Guy, are likely not a complete picture. What other thoughts might make these stories more true or more complete? What other thoughts might make these stories more true or more complete?
Her thoughts. So we only have his.
Okay, I agree. Versus friend. and he told you this story, how might you seek to help him? It might be tempting to simply side with him, feed his ego, and agree that Han must be crazy not to be head over heels in love with him. Would that help Lars? Why or why not? So, if you were his friend, like, what would you do? How would you help him?
I would just tell him to swallow his pride, and instead of ignoring each other for X amount of days, to go have a deep conversation with her. I know when my wife and I argue about stupid things, like nothing's ever resolved by ignoring each other and not talking. So that's not going to get addressed unless someone takes initiative and initiates a conversation about it. So my advice to him would to swallow his pride and go address the situation, ask what she's feeling.
Definitely.
I think I agree with Keaton that he needs to probably get over himself a little bit and kind of see big picture. I know it's hard to swallow your pride a little bit, but I agree with what Keaton said.
Yeah, I think that why it's hard for Lars, because he thinks that he's right, because he's in his box and like he doesn't really understand her, and he's like, oh, I'm right, so why would I have to swallow my pride, and like, what do I need to talk to her about? Like, yeah, so
No one ever wants to admit to be wrong, but it takes one of the two to initiate it. In my own personal experiences, whenever either me or my wife, as soon as someone initiates it, the other is quick to say, like, no, it was my bad as well. It's not always on one person. It just takes one person to admit that they're wrong, if that made sense.
of course, that's why we're constantly invited to be peacemakers, right? And not to seek like contention, not to have arguments with people, and try to find common ground. Okay, so that completes our discussion for part 1. Have you read part 2 already, guys? Would you like me to go over it? You haven't read it. Okay, I will go over it. It's a little bit long, but so after years of ups and downs between reasonable marital happiness and seasons of contention, self-pity, and resentment, Lars was invited to attend a class in which the teacher asked the students to consider a relationship in their lives that they wanted to improve. Lars naturally thought of Han. The teacher then asked the students to answer a few key questions about the relationship. What are this person's needs, objectives, and challenges? How am I a problem for this person? How can I be more helpful to this person? How will I be able to measure and know that I'm actually being more helpful? Lars's answers to these questions surprised and humbled him. While he felt that he and Han communicated fairly well, he had to humbly recognize that he didn't really understand her needs, what she wished to achieve in her life, or the challenges she was facing. Furthermore, the answer to how am I a problem for this person came to his mind quite easily. 1. I feel like you don't really listen to me. And 2. I feel like I'm alone in the management of our household. What troubled Lars most was that he realized that he actually didn't understand what Han meant by either phrase. He had always assumed her meaning, taken offense, and either gone silent or sought to defend himself in battle. Lars didn't know all that he would do to make things better, but he knew where he would start. On a break from the class, he called Han and asked if he could share what he learned. He humbly acknowledged that there was much he didn't know about Han's needs, objectives, and challenges. He then stated that he had heard the two statements that Han had often shared and asked forgiveness that he had never taken the time to humbly listen and understand what she was trying to tell him. Time for the break was short, so he asked if they might go on a date when he returned, so that he could listen and more fully understand what was in Han's heart. Han agreed, and after returning home, the couple went to dinner and had a healing conversation. Lars learned how exhausted Han was as a young mother, and they both came up with ways that Lars could be more helpful to her in the things that mattered most to her. Lars also finally learned that what Han had meant by Han's two painful phrases. The first phrase, "I feel like you don't really listen to me," was a recognition that while Lars looked at Han, restated what she said, and even tried to restate her views, Han knew that Lars was usually just preparing to use what Han had said to explain why he was right and she was wrong. Lars realized that no one wants to be in a relationship where they feel their opinion won't be understood. He realized that while he had felt unseen and unappreciated, Han had felt unheard, and like her thoughts didn't really matter. The second phrase, "I feel like I'm alone in the management of our household," was actually a phrase that, had Lars understood it earlier, could have saved both Han and him years of misunderstanding and pain. Han had actually been trying to tell Lars that while she appreciated all that Lars was doing, something she had tried to tell him many times, she also knew that Lars usually already had an agenda of what he would help with. Han had been wishing that upon his return from work, Lars would simply acknowledge her, hear how she was feeling, and what her day had been like, and then ask her what she needed most. Lars was dumbfounded that he had worked so hard for so long without understanding such a simple concept: to listen to Han, understand what she needed, and focus his helpfulness where it would actually make the biggest difference for Han. In both cases, Lars committed to do better. He felt energized by the prospect of learning to be a true listener. He felt hope in the thought that he could understand Han's needs and then happily respond to them. As Lars found a new way to nurture the relationship with Han, and as Han found a more understanding and less resentful companion, each of them found a safer, nurturing relationship where their love could flourish. While their marriage didn't change completely overnight, both Han and Lars recognized that moment as a turning point to a happier marriage and family. So, why were the questions asked in Lars's class so powerful in changing his feelings toward Han?
I think it's because it kind of answered his own question about why his marriage was struggling. He kind of had like that self-realization that he knew that he was doing wrong.
Mm.
I agree with Keaton. I think halfway through it says Lars finally learned what she meant by her two painful phrases. He kind of learned what was the root cause.
Yeah, I think that these questions made him reflect on like himself and like what is he doing, instead of like blaming everything on her. Um, okay, so the questions invited Lars to see things in a new light. Are there principles in this course or other truths that could have helped Lars open his heart to this kind of change sooner? What do you think?
I think pretty much anything would have helped him because I think the biggest thing is just that he wasn't taking the time to listen to her, and that's something that's super important. Whether you're looking for a win-win scenario You need to know the opinions and thoughts of mind of both parties to be able to recognize what I need to do to help you win and vice versa. And even just having a heart at peace or at war, it seemed like someone previously already said. I mean, they went for days for not talking when, as it said, once they resolved it, they're like, oh, why was that such a big problem? That was super simple.
Yeah, it's been going on for years. Yeah, that's impressive. Okay, thank you for sharing your opinion. So, when you have a friend whose marriage is struggling, or if you yourself are struggling, what can you learn about Lars's change of heart? Why did Lars's heart change? What principles worked in his and Hans' favor? How could you share similar principles in a way that your friend would understand? So if you had a friend going through a similar situation, what would you advise them to do? Would you ask them the same questions as
I know.
Lars'
Sorry.
professor did?
I know if Isaac ever came to me because he had struggles in his marriage, I would tell him to stop being so prideful and to ask kind of what Lars did, to ask his wife why she was frustrated, why she was feeling the way that she feels, so that he knows what he needs to do to fix the issue at hand instead of just blindly guessing at things to improve on, actually find the root of the problem.
Yeah, okay. That sounds good. Isaac, you heard that? All right.
It's good to know I can talk to him, I guess.
All right. So with what you have learned in this class so far, what principles do you feel are important for any couple to understand when they're struggling and they want to return to a happier place? This is like major general reflection of everything.
I really like what we've been reading this week for Anatomy of Peace and how they were talking about it's important when you're feeling very contentious and at with a heart of war that you need to remember good things. Essentially, you just move yourself out of the difficult situation, take a time to reflect on your happy feelings, and really just trying to harness within yourself that feeling of joy to where you don't want to go against your own personal beliefs so that you can then come back to the situation and approach it with a new light, new mindset.
Awesome. Thank you. You know, when I was reading this particular case study, you know, I could only think about the phrase that we should listen not to respond, but we should listen to understand. I think that's kind of like a game changer. When you listen to really like get into that person's shoes and to see their point of view and not like, you know, just argue about, oh, but I. And I think, yeah, it's like it's all the Christ-like attributes that we should develop in ourselves, right? And like when they come together, yeah, it changes everything a lot. Any final thoughts on this case, on what we have learned so far?
I
Anyone would like
was
to add anything?
I was
Go ahead.
thinking about what principles they could have applied at the beginning or before, and I was thinking like what they usually say in the church is that a couple should focus on their relationship in the gospel, so that way they are going to always have a good relationship based on good principles. And maybe they weren't like too close to the gospel. Maybe they were just very busy just to read it or whatever. But these things really help. As I saw some examples in the church, and like praying in family and reading the scriptures in family, they really help to nurture your family and to be united.
Absolutely. That's great, and I absolutely agree with that. So if we build our marriage on the solid foundation of the gospel, then there's no reason for it not to be successful, right? Okay. So I guess we're gonna wrap it up then, and thank you very much for your participation. Who will be our next leader for the next week?
I can do it next week.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Isaac.
No problem.